book that we are going to be starting tonight is a British author named Ronald Dahl. Wrote a book for children called James and the Giant Peach. The synopsis of the book is about a little boy. His name is James Henry Trotter, who lives with his horrid aunts, Spiker and Sponge, after the decease of his parents. And the book talks about, or should I say, it's based around him not having any friends until he meets these magical insects in this gigantic peach. And I don't want to give too much away about the book, so we are actually going to be discussing chapters 1 through 20, and we're maybe comparing it as well to the first 45 minutes of the Disney version of the movie as well. So tonight on our panel, kind of panel, we have the director, myself, Letitia Pettiford, and I will allow each of you to introduce yourself. We'll go right from passage picker with Mrs.
Montgomery.
Miss Montgomery. And then we have the character sketcher as
Bianca Young.
And our word wizard and figurative language finder,
Chad Battle.
Mr. Chad Battle. So we are going to go ahead and open up the first discussion, going on to our first slide. So I thought that it would be great if we started off the discussion tonight with the first question of what was going through your mind when you read chapters 1 and 2 and the specific living arrangement that James finds himself in after the death of his parents. How did this set the tone for you getting ready to prepare to read this story?
Well, I'll go. I have to be honest, when I read the first page, actually, it was like, whoa, like they did not ease you into it. You know, parents dead, first paragraph of the book. And I was kind of like, oh, wow. So is this where this is going? And to hear that he was with, such a small child with these aunts, and in the book, it described them as being very mean and bossy. And it said that they were beating James. Yeah. So I'm like, oh, I mean, it used the term beating. So it was like making it very, it was just very dark to me. So I didn't know if it was something I would be interested in reading on or whatever, but it kind of lightened up in the end. But those first 2 pages kind of got me. I'm just going to be honest.
Yeah. Go ahead,
I can go next. So first thing I noticed was this was not going to be your typical book that I normally read. It starts off, like Bianca said, very dark, very low, just goes different directions that you can't predict. So to me, it was just an unpredictable start. That was where my mind was going. I don't know where this book is going to take me. So that's kind of what I got from it.
Yeah. I mean, literally, when I first was reading it, the book started off with him being 4 years old, and it was setting this precedent of he's in this lovely atmosphere. There's tons of children that he could play with. It referenced to the beach. It was very descriptive, and I was like, oh, right. I was being all dramatic when I was reading it with Aiden, and then it was like, parents got eaten by a rhino. I was like, where did a rhino come from in the middle of just a rhino? Really? I mean, that kind of took me like, okay. And then it started really, like, I think it had said that the rhino had escaped from the London Zoo. And I'm like, okay, so they got a zoo right by the sea. And they got, I was like trying to analyze all these little things while still trying to keep a straight face. Because of course I started off reading it with Aiden, and then it started talking about the abusiveness that he was experiencing at such a young age. Like, and it really hit home for me in the beginning because I am a foster parent, and I know that this happens. Kids, parents pass away and they're stuck to live with family members and sometimes non-family members, and they have a horrible life. So I immediately wanted to stop reading it, just because I just didn't want to read that part. But after reading it, I'm still trying to unpack why the author started it so abruptly with this darkness, heaviness. But I guess it set the tone so that we could really put ourselves in the shoes of this child and what he could be feeling. I think the author did a very great job of describing some of, even, and I know we'll go into it more detail, but I felt like the death of his parents was significant, and we had to understand how James got into this situation in the beginning. Like, it was necessary, but it was an evil necessary that we just wasn't expecting when you have this beautiful cover and this Disney movie in your mind. So I really thought that was, man, it really hit me. What about you, Monica?
Well, I mean, just pretty much everything that you guys said. When I read the first two chapters, it was like Bianca said, it was like they painted this glorious seaside family, young family, full of hopes and dreams, and then angry rhino, they're dead. And he's dropped in a pit of despair. I mean, at 4 years old, the ability to comprehend that, one, your parents are gone, you're never going to have them again, and then to have people who treat you so with such disdain,
Right.
and their names and all those other things, like they never called him by his name, they never said his name aloud. Everything that identified who he was, up until 4 years old, they stripped from him.
Yeah.
And disaster does that to us. Sometimes when things happen in our lives, whatever we were before, we are no longer. And what I see Dahl doing in this is painting that picture clearly for the reader, that James will never be James Henry Trotter,
No.
the James Henry Trotter he was again. And it was dark. And I know, okay, I have to be honest, I don't like this kind of stuff, but this kind of writing I'm used to, and I have an appreciation for, because I know where it's going, or where it should be going. But let's just say if I had done a cold read, I'd have clearly been like, what? And I definitely would have not been like, I'm gonna read this to my small child.
Yeah.
So yeah, Letitia, I'm with you there. It's like, oh, let me, the end. End of the story.
That was the shortest 15 seconds of book that he could ever. He's like, done? I was like, yeah, let's start the movie. Let's just start the movie. So let's go on straight into our second one. Passage picture. Monica, go ahead.
All right. So the passages that I picked really resonated with me. The first passage was, I labeled it Alone in the Dark. And that's chapter 9, page 27. If everybody wants to just kind of flip there so you can see where it came from. And I'll try to read it really quickly. Oh, I'm flipping the wrong way. It's the second paragraph, and it says, most people, and especially small children, are often quite scared of being out of doors alone in the moonlight. Everything is so deadly quiet, and the shadows are so long and black, and they keep turning into strange shapes that seem to move as you look at them. And the slightest little snap of a twig makes you jump. James felt exactly like that now. The first question I have on there is, what would be another benefit of Dahl choosing to force the reader to see James as the vulnerable child he was, and not the possible hero? And I'm glad that Letitia ended where she ended, about him being 3 years older, but he's still only 7. And it's important that we recognize he's still only 7, and I want to read, like, to give you guys a jump off point for answering that question. I said I chose this passage for a couple of reasons, but initially because of the element of surprise. I was surprised because Dahl starts the passage as if there's some kind of contradiction about to take place. So with that
introduction and the question, what ideas do you guys have about that passage?
It was a great way for the author to make sure that we understood the innocence of a child, and also the fact that this is normal for a child to be scared. On top of everything that he was going through, everything should be frightening him at this age. So this is something a typical, 7-year-old would experience. So I think they wanted to let us know that he's still a child. Even though he's being asked to do things that adults would be doing, he still has that sense of innocence in him because he is still a minor. So I think it was important for him to remind us of that, 9 chapters in, that, hey, don't forget that this is still a child. Even though you've read everything that he's been through, that he's been going through, don't forget that this is still a child that is scared of clouds, moving, imagine, even though we see and imagine things in the clouds and we think of a happy thing, he sees these things as fearful things. And a lot of it has to do with what he's experienced already at 7 or 8.
And I think the author does it also to kind of give us that, paint that picture so that in the end, we were able to see this drastic change. Because although we have not, I've never read the book, I have not seen the movie, so I don't know what the outcome is going to be. However, in the stopping point, I felt as if, James is going to come out, good on that end. So it's like, okay, let's paint this picture, show that he's this child, show that he's so vulnerable, and have us thinking that that's what's going to happen throughout. And then once he gets to a place, okay, James may end up being the hero in the end.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, one of those things where I paint this one picture so that you can really, really see the difference between the two.
Yeah. And he really took the time during this part to emphasize on the fact that this huge peach, James couldn't even go to it. He couldn't touch it. It was steadily growing overnight. Like it was, and he was hungry. So you got this big, juicy peach that you was like, why can't I have it? I'm starving. I am extremely hungry, and I see this. So it's scary and tempting because you wants to run out there and go eat it while they're asleep. Yeah, he probably has to clean up around it. It's intimidating to him.
So
what do you think, Battle?
So James Dahl does an excellent job of taking you on this ride at first, and then he reveals like the hero character in his own way. So he's setting us up very nicely. I have not seen the end, and I don't know what's going to happen at the end, but I can see a traditional story being played out where a character starts off vulnerable, and that's where he is. And they remind you of it in this instance of how when that boy started off, he thought a rhinoceros killed his family. And I don't believe it was a rhinoceros, but this helps just us remind us how vulnerable he was, that he wasn't even in his right mind because of that trauma.
Right. You know what? And something you said, Chad, you were like building us to see, and Bianca said it too, to see the growth of the hero or the path of the hero. Because one of the things that stood out to me was he made a point to let us know that he was ordinary. There was nothing extraordinary about this child. Normally when we read stories like this, we get a clue or a foreshadowing of who the hero is because they stand out. They are abnormal. Like when he started that line saying most people, and especially small children, are often quite scared. And then he goes back and says, James felt exactly the same way. So he made a point of letting us know there's nothing special or extraordinary about James.
Right.
But he still we don't know, because like you said, we haven't finished the text. But now we're saying, so like this simple, not noteworthy person may become a hero. So that's something that would propel the reader to the end. So I think that was very strategic of Dahl.
I also think like at this point in the book is when he kind of was like, I'm fed up, because he had just watched everybody all excited. He saw his parents making money off of it. I think this was the turning point where he was like, that's it. I'm going down and looking at this peach. They didn't have me locked up.
But you know what? And I know we got to move on, but I kind of disagree with you there. At that point, I think he was at his lowest point. I think if had not been for the magic, he would have been at the point of no return, like, finally accepting his fate. The magic changed that, and I think that's why it happened when it did. So yeah, I hear what you're saying, and for us, yeah, that would have been the breaking point. We'd have been like, dag nabbit, I done waited all day and I gotta go clean up trash. But see, I think Dahl was making a point to say this is not this guy.
And see, that's
not who this is.
I think that because the last paragraph, he was just like, it was almost like he said a magnet was drawing him toward this. And he finally built up the courage to go over that fence, that barricade that they had specifically told him. That last chapter on page 28 is when he's just like,
we can't go to 28, Letitia. We have to stay on the passage in 27. I know you biting at the bit.
I know. I was enjoying this point. At this point, I'm mad. I'm on team James. I'm like, get him. Okay, next thing we're going to talk about is more about James, the character with Miss Young. Miss Bianca, go ahead.
Oh, I'm glad we are where we are, because that's actually where I want to go next, to page 28. So in my role as the character sketcher, it told me to choose a character. And of course, why not choose James? Because he was our main character. We're focusing a lot on him. And if I were to pull some character traits to describe James, I would say, he was lonely. They told us that first page of the book. Once his parents died, it left him lonely. It also said in the in the book where he complained to his aunts about being lonely. He wanted to play with other children. He wanted to, he sees this marvelous city down the hill in this beach, and he just wants to be able to meet people. And they said, hey, we'll never take you. You'll never leave this hill. And they, so he was extremely lonely. And I couldn't imagine as a child that young, not having my parents and then being placed with people who are just so mean and evil to me. I would say he was adventurous. And I think that was that child in him, those childlike features and characteristics, because some children sometimes don't know to be scared of certain things, because when I think about me, there's no way that I would have just walked up to a gigantic peach. And that's just some phobias that I have. I'm just being honest. I don't like things that should not be big, that are really big. It's the weirdest thing in the world. So I couldn't see myself going up to a gigantic peach or making friends with these huge insects. Okay. I would also say that he was friendly, because he was able to make these friends, and he yearned for friends. He could have been a person who just said, well, I'm here by myself and just kind of cope with it and deal with it. But he actually yearned to make friends and to be around other people. So in saying all of that, I have a couple of questions here, but I'm going to go with the second one because we were already finishing up on page 27. So it says here, James was so eager to climb into a giant peach, not knowing where it would lead and what he would find. What do you think provoked James to do so? So he goes up to this peach, not knowing, he sees this hole, and he was okay with just going in it. And I'll tell you what I think, but go ahead.
if I could go first, that in and of itself, like, anything had to be better than where he was.
Right.
There you go. Anything had to be better than where he was. My thing is that he was out. First of all, he was outside, locked outside. It wasn't just that he was outside, but he was locked outside, left outside in the cold. And like, we mentioned earlier, he was hungry, and there were so many other emotions that were going through his head. He was afraid, all these other things. But I think that smell, the peach, that attraction to the peach was more than just it over. You know what I'm saying? It took over every other sense. And since he couldn't go backwards or didn't want to go backwards, let's put it that way, anything ahead of him was better than nothing. And then, I think we go by our instinct. And as adults, we have learned to ignore our instincts, right? But again, going back to Dahl making him a child, and not just a child, but a young child, isolated child. His instincts were all he had. And
Right.
that was what I feel like, I wouldn't say eager, but free to go and follow his instincts and see where it led him. That's my take on that.
I have no objections to that because I have a child of my own. I know that my child will go seek whatever she can. So James was the same way. James just wanted to get out. And you have a big red, orange, yellow, peach sitting there. Children are going to go to it. I don't think it was even a provocation because he wanted it. And he, all of his heart told him to go that way. And with the magical man that came and appeared to him, letting him know, what this will do to him. He started to think, put 2 + 2 together. And I think that kind of helped lead him to the peach.
Yeah. And this is why I really thought this was that change of moment. Like it italicized. I don't know if you guys noticed that. When it said something else, he told himself, something stranger than ever this time is about to happen to me again soon. And then to me, that was that pivotal moment where his mind shifted, because at the beginning of that paragraph, right before that, he was frightened. He was scared. And then he took a different look at that peach and saw this like beautiful crystal silver ball that this light is hitting. And then I was like, he saw hope. He saw excitement. That fear kind of got washed away by that. And that's when I was thinking that's when it changed for him. That pivotal moment when he was like, just like you said, what's the worst that can happen? This happened for a reason. He told me that something like this was going to happen. Why am I so afraid of this? And I knew it was going to happen. He just didn't know what form it was going to take on. So I that's why I felt driven towards, this is when it changed for him. When he was just like, what's the worst?
Right. And that's all of you have said exactly what I was thinking. Monica started out with the whole, hey, anything is better than where I am, so I'm willing to try anything at this point. And I felt like that too. His aunts locked him out of the house. So he's out there. So it's like, hey, why not? And then also, like Letitia said too, it tells us right there, he kept feeling that something was going to happen. Something, and he used the word strange, which of course, all of what happened was very strange.
What's strange?
Right. And he kept, right. He kept saying,
so he's experienced some strange stuff before, but this was even stranger than before.
Right. And then it said that the garden, the whole garden seemed to be alive with magic. So again, that's those childlike features. He saw something magical, and of course thinking, maybe this is what's going to save me from my situation.
Right.
I'll go ahead and try it.
And I want to add to that, I'm glad you brought up the fact that the whole garden was alive with magic, because magic entices. It seduces, and here we are with a vulnerable child who is being encouraged into, let's say, we'll say right now, predicting its destiny. We don't know because we haven't seen the end, but he's being seduced and enticed by this. All of that, from the glowing grass to the silver ball to all of these magical things that we relate to as magical. So why not this 7-year-old? And again, as an adult, will we have been as easily enticed? Probably not. We'd be like, oh, that's dew on the grass. That's the reflection of the moon off the peach. But not to James. James, a seed had been sown in his mind that something fantastical was going to happen. Then you got all this glowing stuff. So I think that was like almost, now that I'm thinking about it,
when in the beginning, when in the movie at least, he painted this picture that his dad had described of this place that he was going to take him. Like, I think that's where his initial, dreaming and using his imagination of all these places, because how in the world would he know what a diamond looked like? Where would he have been exposed to a diamond? Where would he have been exposed to all these things if he's been so locked down since the age of 4? But, where is he getting these? It's I feel like, even though he did not have his parents, I feel like that that was still carried on. Like he still gets to keep that memory of his parents, and that's kind of what keeps him hopeful that there is more, that there is a possibility for me to get out of this. I think that's what's keeping him fueled through all of this that he's going through. I don't know. A lot more than I thought that I was going to get through this book, but it's going to be interesting. I'm ready though. So next we're going to go over into our word wizard and figurative language finder with Mr. Ball.
Well, when it comes to words, Dahl is a master. He uses words like to grab your attention, and he did it throughout this whole book. Like we've been saying, strange, magic, peculiar, very mysterious words. Those are words that are used throughout. But the word that I wanted to focus on with our first question was, in the sentence, of course, I'm not talking to you, you ass. Why does the author use the word ass instead of something less harsh? I wanted to know your opinion. And if you need to reference where it is, it's on page 41, chapter 13, to give you a better context. So I'll give you guys about 10 seconds to find that. And I'm going to read it to you a little bit before what happened. So a little earlier it says, turn out the light, he called, raising his voice. James glanced round the room, wondering which of the others might be talking to, but they were all asleep. The old green grasshopper was snoring loudly through his nose. The ladybug was making whistling noises as she breathed. And the earthworm was coiled up like a spring, one end of the hammock, wheezing, blowing through his open mouth. And for Miss Spider had made a lovely web for herself across the corner of the room, and James could see her crouching right in the very center of it, mumbling softly in her dreams. I said, turn out the light, shouted the centipede angrily. Are you talking to me? James asked him. Of course not. I'm not talking to you, you ass. So I want to just see what were your thoughts on why you think the author used such a harsh word.
Well, I'm going to start by pointing out the fact that we're talking about somebody from a different culture. And even though it's English, it's not North American English. Mm-hmm. It's UK, it's British English. So that's the first thing. So we're talking about a different culture. So even though it's English, it may mean something different. So it may not have been harsh to Dahl. Mm-hmm. That's something that we have to take into account. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, let's look at the definitions of the words. Mm-hmm. Wordplay. You know, him using ass was not him saying what Americans would call, you know, an a-hole. It was him saying, you dumb donkey. Mm-hmm. You dumb dummy. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So it's important that as we read texts like these, like we did, you know, we did the research to find out who he was, where he was from, so we could kind of get into the author's head so that interpreting the book would be a little bit easier, especially because there are times in here I'm like, what? Let me look this up. If y'all saw my book, y'all see all these definitions in the margin because I'm like, what is going on here? Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's my take on it. I probably shouldn't have went first, but
no, you're good.
That's my take on it.
Googled. Probably should.
Yeah, Google.
Ended up going to Macmillan's dictionary, and I Googled British term as just to see back then kind of what they would use, and literally it says old-fashioned, a stupid or annoying person. You know, and a part of me is thinking during this time, because he was so naive of things, I feel like the insect, the grasshopper, the ladybug, the spider, all of them have been in this situation for so long, and they were fearful, if you remember. They were fearful of the aunts, which means to me they had an encounter with him. And they had the reality of what could happen if those aunts realized where they were. And everything that was going on. And they were like, how is he so naive to what his reality is? We understand that if they see us, we're doomed. We got to figure out a way to I feel like they had barricaded and used this peach as a safe haven. And I feel like they were telling him, you are not realizing that this is our shelter. We're scared of her. Why aren't you? I feel like that's the context that they might have used. Well, the author may have used this word for on behalf of the insects talking to him this way.
Bianca?
I'm agreeing with Monica with just the words having different meanings during different times within different cultures. And that word possibly was not as harsh. We hear it and we think, oh my goodness, that's because our culture and society has taught us that that's, what we know as profane language. Whereas probably during those times, it wasn't. Like Letitia said, the definition says annoying person. What was that? So, dumb. Yeah.
And that's what I got from it. The same thing. The time period, all in that whole era, they were thinking that's not like a negative word for them. Not like that.
I feel I have to disagree, because if you look up a couple chapters before this, he had talked about him leaving that doggone light on once before. He was upset that he would not turn off this light. So I think he was just so frustrated. He didn't mean it to James that way, but I felt like he did mean it in a negative way. Because the centipede kept leaving the light on.
Well, I think.
What?
I think Dahl did it to show more of the the centipede's attitude than anything. He was just trying to show what kind of person he was.
And I'm glad you said that, because even though it may not have been a profane word or a swear word, like we know profane and swear words, but it was considered crass. If you listen to the centipede's accent versus the accent of the ladybug, let's look at this dichotomy, okay? The ladybug, she was very soft, and her voice was very demure, and her speech was eloquent. But the centipede, I'm a pest, I'm proud to be a pest, and he had what we would call now an East London accent, which would be ghetto.
And you can tell he's already mad. He said, I said turn off the light. Shout it.
Right. So it may not have been intended to be profane, but it was intended, I think, also to show, like Battle said, the personality, the who he was as an individual, the centipede.
Yeah.
So that word did a couple of different things, but mainly it showed us who he was.
For just the figurative language, I think the first ones, you got to really go back and read it real good. So I'm going to just go with two. What is the author telling you about Auntie Sponge? He says she was like a great babbling white, soggy, overboiled cabbage. What does that say to you?
Blah. Blah.
It ain't let me tell you something. It ain't nothing like some soggy cabbage. Oh my goodness. I am one of those people who still likes to have a little crunch to my vegetables. They need to be firm. So when I think of when I read that, it was like thinking of just some overcooked that now has almost turned into baby food. So I visualized her being just like this just ball of, I don't know, grossness. Just like, because that's how they were describing how she looked. So, you know, I'm thinking like this round. You know what movie is that? Batman? And what's the character that's like really
Penguin.
round?
Penguin.
The penguin. You
Penguin.
know how just
Yeah.
I was thinking that
Grotesque.
vision,
Mhm.
that visual is what I had. Like, you know, this big plump, I don't know, pale,
Soggy. Yes, pale, flavorless, colorless. There
Wrinkled.
was nothing
Right.
appealing about her. You know, cabbage that's been boiled to death. All the
Ugh.
flavor and nutrients have been boiled out
It's
of it.
limp.
It has no sustenance whatsoever.
Mhm.
Who wants to eat that?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's definitely what I saw when I was reading. I was like, okay, let me make sure I don't get to that point.
A mess.
You got too much
I thought,
melanin.
oh,
You got too much melanin for
I
that.
know, and I was like,
I'm
oh,
sorry.
and they described her like that, and it's a very vivid
mhm.
description. Like
Yeah,
you can swear somebody and not describe them as well as they just did to her. It told me she was old. It told me she was antiquated. It told me she just talked out of the side of her mouth. We all know those people.
mm-hmm. Yep.
And when I hear overboil, I hear you're over the hill. You're not of you're antiquated. You just don't get it anymore.
Soggy.
Mm-hmm.
Overdone.
I think he used babbling because when I thought of the word babbling, I instantly thought of babies and how when they first learn how to talk and you really don't know what they're saying, they just I felt like the author was trying to like, she probably ain't talking about nothing, but she just constantly talking about something. You know, it's just nonstop. You know, that's what I kind of took from it.
We see that in the beginning of the book with the poem where she was describing herself. Well, I don't, you know what? I take that back. I'm not sure which one of them, but they were going back and forth with how beautiful they were. And, you know, it's almost like they were competing with one another. And she did it in this rhyming form. So it was just like, what are you talking about? Nobody asked you about how pretty you are. You just felt the need to tell. So that was
the power of affirmations. You know, you say it to yourself a lot of times before. Yeah, affirmations, you'll start believing it. She was trying to boost up her self-esteem.
Because of course the author's description of her was totally just different from her own description.
Right.
Definitely. So I think this is a great place to stop for today. I think that we should definitely keep these things. We did this on a Jamboard so that we can add to it. So maybe next week, if we have a little extra time, we can go back and hit some of the questions that we weren't able to get to. But then I feel like we should just continue to add to this, because if we do ever have to read this in the future, these are some key points that we can definitely pull out for our students. If we ever come across this book and things that we have talked about when we read this, and we can go back and draw and pull to bring to light to our students in the future, how they can analyze this text and what they can get from just the little things. We didn't even touch everything. These are just minor things that we touched. So I think for next week, we're going to go through chapters 21 to 39, finish up the movie, because we didn't even really touch too much on comparing it with the movies. But I think if we can start working on that for next week, that will be a great start for us for next week. That's
okay.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us for our first annual Chat and Chew. I don't think we chewed, we definitely chatted.